Can you imagine the world champion leading a rebellion against Formula One itself? Max Verstappen arrives at the Chinese Grand Prix amidst a scandal that is shaking the entire paddock. What began as a simple technical complaint now threatens to become a crisis between drivers, teams, and the FIA. Before we continue, I want to know your opinion. Do you think Verstappen is right to criticize the new Formula One rules? And the big question is this: is the reigning champion about to trigger the biggest political conflict of the new F1 era? In this video, we'll analyze why Max Verstappen arrives at the Chinese Grand Prix in one of the most tense situations of his career. It's not just about performance. It's about politics, regulations, and the very future of Formula One. It all started after the chaotic start to the season in Australia, where the new 2026 rules left many drivers deeply frustrated. And Verstappen was the first to say so publicly. To understand why Max Verstappen arrives at the Chinese Grand Prix surrounded by so much tension, we must first look at what happened just a week earlier at the start of the season. The Australian Grand Prix was chaotic, unpredictable, and technically revealing. There, the teams and drivers faced the new 2026 regulations for the first time in real-world conditions, regulations that promised a more efficient and technologically advanced Formula One, but which in practice are forcing drivers to drive in a completely different way than they were accustomed to over the last decade. From the car radios to the conversations in the paddock, what you heard was always the same: confusion, frustration, and many questions about whether the category has truly found the right balance between technological innovation and sporting spectacle. The core of the problem lies in the new hybrid power concept, which splits the energy almost 50-50 between the combustion engine and the electric system. On paper, it seems like a logical evolution towards the future of mobility, but on the track, it has created an unexpected situation. Drivers must constantly manage battery power to avoid running out of steam at critical moments during a lap. This has introduced a phenomenon that has already become infamous within the paddock: energy clipping. In simple terms, it means that when the battery runs low, the car loses a huge portion of its power on the straights, which can translate into dramatic speed differences between cars that, under normal conditions, should be virtually identical. It was precisely in this context that Verstappen staged one of the most talked about comebacks of the season so far. However, after getting out of the car, his comments made it clear that something hadn't pleased him at all. Verstappen described the experience as strange, unnatural, even frustrating for a driver accustomed to attacking every corner. According to him, the driver now spends more time thinking about the battery than about the car's limits. The central point of these conversations revolves around the extreme energy management demanded by the new regulations. The cars now rely on a much more powerful electrical system than in previous generations, forcing drivers to carefully plan when to use energy and when to conserve it. In theory, this should create more race strategy, but many drivers believe the actual effect is exactly the opposite. At times, the cars lose so much power when the battery runs out that the speed differences on the straights can be enormous. In certain situations, differences of nearly 40 or even 50 kilometers per hour have been seen between cars, something that is generating overtaking maneuvers that many consider artificial and unnatural within the classic dynamics of Formula One. From there, even more sensitive rumors began to circulate within the paddock. Some specialized journalists and Formula One analysts have suggested that several drivers are lobbying in a coordinated manner for the FIA to react quickly and review certain aspects of the regulations before the season progresses too far. There has even been talk that, if their complaints go unheard, the drivers could exert public pressure during the Chinese Grand Prix weekend. This wouldn't be a formal protest, but rather a collective stance that would make it clear that those involved in the sport believe the current balance between technology and competition isn't working as expected. Amid all this political and media noise, the FIA has already begun to discreetly make its moves. Within the federation, they are discussing possible technical adjustments that could be introduced in the upcoming races, from increasing energy recharging capacity to modifying how electric power is deployed during a lap. However, any changes at this point in the season could alter the competitive balance between the teams, making every decision a delicate one. The team knows that any public statement could further amplify the controversy, especially when their star driver is the one who ignited the discussion. However, internally, the team is also aware that many of Verstappen's criticisms have a technical basis. The engineers have been carefully analyzing the data collected in Australia and the subsequent simulations, and everything points to the new energy system limiting the car's true potential at certain key moments of the lap. In other words, Red Bull doesn't deny the problem, but neither does it want to turn it into an open conflict with the Federation. From a purely technical standpoint, the RB22 appears to be one of the most sophisticated cars of this new generation. The aerodynamic design is extremely aggressive, with solutions that aim to maximize airflow to the rear of the car and optimize the use of the hybrid system. Under ideal conditions, some internal analyses suggest that the car could have a very significant advantage in race pace over several of its direct rivals. However, that performance depends on the energy management system functioning almost perfectly. When clipping occurs on long straights, even a superior car can suddenly find itself vulnerable to rivals arriving with more energy available at that moment. For Verstappen, the situation is particularly frustrating. In recent years, he has become accustomed to dominating races thanks to a near-perfect balance of driving talent, team strategy, and car performance. Now the scenario is different. At certain times, the driver can't simply attack or defend using the car's full potential because he must constantly think about how to conserve energy for the next straight or the next overtaking attempt. This change in the way of racing is precisely what has provoked his harshest criticism. At the same time, Red Bull also understands that the Chinese Grand Prix could be a crucial moment to truly gauge the car's behavior under these regulations. The Shanghai circuit has very different characteristics from Australia and demands extremely precise energy management due to its long straights and heavy braking zones. If the current tension between drivers, teams, and the FIA continues to escalate, the consequences could extend far beyond mere paddock rhetoric. Formula One is a sport where technical policy has always held enormous sway, but when drivers begin to so directly express their discontent with the regulations, the situation becomes particularly delicate. Verstappen is one of the most influential voices within the driver group. Therefore, his criticisms have sparked a conversation that now involves teams, engineers, management, and the federation itself. One of the first consequences could be an accelerated review of certain aspects of the technical regulations. Within the FIA, possible adjustments related to the electrical power system are already being discussed, especially regarding how it is recharged and deployed during a lap. Some proposals include slightly increasing the battery's recharging capacity or modifying the power limits to reduce the impact of clipping on the straights. The problem is that any such modification could disrupt the competitive balance between teams that have designed their cars with very different philosophies. What some teams might see as an improvement could mean losing some of the technical advantage others have built up over years. Another important consequence concerns the relationship between the drivers and the FIA itself. Historically, when drivers organize and present a common stance, the federation is forced to listen carefully. This isn't necessarily a direct confrontation, but rather a reminder that the spectacle depends heavily on those inside the car. If several top drivers begin to publicly express that the new regulations don't offer the driving experience they expect from Formula One, media and sporting pressure could quickly escalate. In a global championship where every race is analyzed in detail, public perception of the spectacle also plays a crucial role. In the short term, all eyes are on what happens during the Chinese Grand Prix weekend. The Shanghai circuit is no ordinary track on the calendar. It's a circuit that combines long, sweeping corners with one of the longest straights in the championship, making energy management an absolutely crucial factor. If the power loss issues on the straights resurface, Verstappen's criticisms could gain even more traction within the paddock. In other words, China could become the first real test to determine whether the new regulations are working as intended or if they require urgent adjustments before the season progresses. For this reason, there's already talk in the paddock of a major technical meeting between the FIA, the teams, and the drivers' representatives after the race. The objective would be to analyze the real-world data collected in the first races of the year and assess whether the car's behavior matches what the engineers projected during the development of the regulations. These types of meetings are not unusual in a season marked by such significant technical changes, but the current context gives them special importance. Media pressure, driver statements, and public attention mean that any decision made in these early weeks could influence the entire course of the championship. There is also another key element that could shape the immediate future of the championship. Teams are still learning to fully exploit this new generation of cars. Many of the limitations seen at the Australian Grand Prix could be reduced in the coming weeks as engineers optimize energy maps, hybrid management software, and race strategies. In modern Formula One, a small improvement in energy system efficiency can completely change the car's straight-line behavior. That's why some teams believe that part of the problem could be solved simply with technical evolution and more development time. The new regulations have changed how cars use their power, introduced a much greater reliance on energy management, and sparked a legitimate debate about whether the balance between technology and competition is still right. What began as a direct criticism from the Dutch driver has ended up exposing a concern shared by several drivers and teams. At the same time, the sporting context adds even more tension to the situation. Red Bull still has an extremely competitive car, and Verstappen remains one of the most complete drivers on the grid. However, the new regulations introduce variables that could limit even the most dominant teams. Energy management, the infamous clipping on long straights, and hybrid strategy have become factors that now have as much influence as aerodynamics or driver talent. Therefore, each race at the start of this season is functioning as a real experiment to understand whether this new generation of Formula One delivers the spectacle that was expected. The Chinese Grand Prix could be the moment when all these doubts find clear answers. If the races showcase natural overtaking, interesting strategies, and genuine competitive balance, the controversy might begin to dissipate as the weeks go by. But if power issues, extreme speed differences, and driver frustration resurface on the track, then the pressure on the FIA to modify the regulations will inevitably increase. And when that pressure is spearheaded by a figure like Verstappen, the discussion ceases to be a mere technical debate and becomes a central issue for the entire championship. For now, the only certainty is that the spotlight is completely on the Dutch driver and what happens in Shanghai. Every radio message, every overtake, and every post-race statement could influence the course of the story. And that's precisely why I want to know your opinion. Do you think Verstappen is right to question these new rules? Or do you think Formula One is simply going through the normal process of adapting to a new technological era? Don't forget to subscribe to the channel.